To the people of Guam, we are still at recess until we establish a quorum. Thank you. Good morning, my colleagues, and good morning to the people of Guam. The Committee of the Whole is called to order. Yesterday, we ended with University of Guam. There are no other amendments. We will now close. Senator Shelton, on UG, do you have anything for UG?
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you very much. I move to bookmark sections 3 and 14, Mr. Chair.
Point of inquiry is, what page are we on? This is page 22, section 3?
Section 3 on pages 22 and 23, and section 14 on page 27.
All right, are there any objections to that bookmark, since obviously there was a motion the last time for a bookmark? There being none, those pages are bookmarked. We will now move to GCC. Speaker?
On UOG, thank you. UOG is where the appropriation for the Guam Cancer Trust Fund is, and I want to thank, OFB that amount has increased this year compared to last year. But I just want to know if this meets the percentage that's supposed to be given to the Guam Cancer Trust Fund based on the law, which requires that they get 15% of the Healthy Futures Fund.
Yeah, based on the percentage on the law. Steve?
Now you tell me, it's in the car. I got it. Okay, Senator Talay, the answer to your question is the appropriation in the bill right now is only up about 8% of the required 15%. Unlike in prior years, we've been very difficult basically to meet that 15% coming up from the Healthy Future Fund. But this year, I'm trying my best to meet that goal. And although we can't do it all in 1 year, I believe getting at least 50% there is better than in the previous year. So to your answer, we're probably budgeting it right now at 8% of the 15% required by statute.
All right. I want to thank you for that, for finding that. And I want to just put on the record so that we ensure that our goal is still to comply with the law, as much as we can. This is Mossy, Mr. Chair.
Yes, thank you. Also,
Mr. Chair.
Senator Tully, you have comment to make?
Yes, I do, Mr. Chair. I too want to stand and rise and thank so much for OFB to consider this. I've been advocating for this increase for many years. If you notice in the past, we've only been given $1 million to the Cancer Coalition for the last 2 years. I mean, even the last 3 years, if I look back further, it'll probably be the same too. But this year, this body and OFB recognizes as well the importance of the Cancer Coalition and the true meaning of why the Healthy Futures Fund was created in the very beginning. So I want to thank you so much for hearing our plea. I met with OFB to advocate for this, and now this body is giving the Cancer Coalition $3 million, which it might not be able to go back and adjust what happened in the past, but we can now look at the future and what we can do to helping those individuals with cancer. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Now we have bookmarked University of Guam in those two sections. We will now move to Chapter 2, Education under the Guam Community College, and we have an amendment from Senator Moylan. co-sponsored by Senator Nelson. Senator Moylan, your amendment, sir?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe that we worked that out with clerks. We moved that further back to miscellaneous, please.
It's been moved to miscellaneous? Okay, we'll move it
Thank
to
you, Mr. Chair.
miscellaneous. If I'm correct, there are no other amendments. Other amendments that were going to be proffered for GC has been moved to miscellaneous. That being said, I will move to close the GCC portion of this budget. All right? We are closed with GCC. We'll now move to the Guam Commission for Education Certification. Do we have any amendments? My colleagues, I've been getting calls that there's several agencies that need and are going to be requesting for rollover appropriations. Okay? So I'm just letting you know, I don't have any amendment for that, but as we're moving along, anticipate it, okay? That's all. Just a notice to anticipate. It's not for debate or discussion. We'll do it. You can object to it when we come to that. Senator Tello?
Mr. Chair, would OFB be kind enough to explain exactly what rollover is for those who are listening?
All right, okay.
And what does that exactly mean, and how can we gauge whether that rollover is a prior obligation that's already been encumbered by earmarked or something that they just didn't spend? Can they explain that, please, Mr. Chair?
Understood. Steve, if you can go ahead and explain the rollover.
Yes, Senator. When the departments and agencies request through the OFB to authorize the provision to roll over, what they're referring to is to have them have access and the authority to spend prior year appropriation that was authorized to them in previous budgets. It could be just 1 year, or it could be multiple years going back. And those balances supposedly are reflected in the AS400 system. And at the end of each fiscal year, you normally calculate and determine what those balances are. And those balances technically, if they're not used to liquidate outstanding encumbrances for that fiscal year, then those balances become and remain available. So when they request for carryover provision, it's just to authorize the departments and agencies the use of monies that were appropriated in prior budgets.
All right. Also, there are agencies that have advised me that through their request for procurement, the procurement process wasn't completed, and then come August 27, GSA intends to end it, and they weren't able to complete it, and that's the reason why some of them are considering it. And just for notice, that's all it is. Senator Nelson.
Is it possible to request the reason why we didn't include it in the budget? The reason why we did not include rollover in the budget? Because I know that we've done it before where the budget already gives prior year obligations, the authority to use prior year obligations. So why didn't we do it in this budget initially?
Yes, Senator. The reason why it's not basically a standard rollover provision in the budgets because some agencies at the end of the fiscal years don't have any balances. So for those agencies that are requesting, I'm assuming that through their accounting and their financial statements, they are showing balances that may be possibly available for their use in the upcoming fiscal year. But we don't normally put it in the budget as a standard provision. Well, you know,
All right, that issue is settled. Now we will move. So in other words, the GCC is closed. All right, Guam Community College is closed. We are now at yes, ma'am, Madam Speaker.
Yeah, on GCC, if I could ask, so the
Okay.
last section of the GCC talks about Peace Officer Standards and Training Commission. It's giving an additional $72,000 from the general fund for a program specialist to establish standardized and uniform law enforcement leadership
amendment?
structure tier. But my question is that the peace officer normally has been funded by, GCC has been able to find funding for this from grants and their other, just their current infrastructure. So is this for an additional person and they're going to establish a leadership structure, but then they're going to be held full-time there? Or is this just, a contract amount? Or is this because they're no longer able to fund the person that they've had there as like the director of the post?
Madam Speaker, if you notice, it was it's in here because they requested it, and it's within their budget. So they're just using their same funds.
Allocated, okay, I have no objection to the
All right,
allocation, but
thank you. So,
is it an additional employee or current?
current person?
Currently, it is reflected in their staffing pattern, but my understanding, the positions are vacant.
All right, thank you.
But they're trying to recruit for them.
All right, we'll move along. GCC is closed. We are now on the Commission for Education Certification. There are no amendments. That agency is also closed. We are now on Chapter 3, Health, Guam Memorial Hospital Authority. And I know there are amendments. None? We do have 6 amendments, but we'll go ahead and begin with Speaker. You have 3 amendments.
I think mine are on public health, not GMH. On GMH.
I apologize.
Yeah, I did want to just bring up a question, and this was the Healthy Futures Fund, right? So according to the statute, GMH is supposed to receive 12% of the Healthy Futures Fund every year and $1 million towards a line of credit that they could utilize throughout the year. And it's notable that this year there is no Healthy Futures Fund appropriation to GMH. And I just wanted, my calculations are that 12% would have been $5 million, and I want to just confirm if that's correct.
Steve, if you can answer that question, please.
Senator, you are correct. If you recall, back in GMH's budget hearing, we asked them several questions regarding their funding. And the only thing they requested from the body was the amount they were entitled to under the pharmaceutical fund from the BBT, which is exactly what we gave them, but their request was $18 million. So because we wanted to get to the level of $18 million, what we did is we gave them the difference between what we're entitled to in the pharmaceutical and the $18 million, which I believe was about $3 million from the general fund. But they did not ask anything specifically from the general fund, but because we wanted to meet at least the $18 million that we're requesting for, we subsidized it, the 18 from the general fund.
Yeah, and I want to thank OFB for doing that because, yeah, it's their request, right? And the request looks to be about 10.5 million less than the fiscal year 21 appropriation, which of course we questioned them about at their hearing, but they keep insisting they're going to make do with this amount. And so of course we're hoping that that is the case. There also notably was no request from GMH for any capital improvement money. And while we expect them to receive federal funds related to COVID, it was not clear either at that hearing whether they would be receiving, in addition to those federal funds directly for GMH, any additional ARP funds. So just wanted to put that on the record and recognize that, yeah, this is how OFB came up with this number. But we are not, again, complying with the Healthy Future Funds law, and I feel like we need to assess that as a legislature, right? If those laws are going to be ignored, then we maybe need to reassess what we're going to do about that. Situs Masi.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Senator Nelson, did you have something for GMH you wanted to speak on?
Just make a motion to bookmark the GMH chapter because I know one of our colleagues is preparing an amendment at this time.
Yes, I'd like to bookmark as well, Mr. Chair, the
All right.
GMH appropriation.
All right, there's a motion is there any objection? There being none, GMH's bookmark. We now move to the Department of Public Health and Social Services. Madam Speaker, now it is in fact your amendments. You have 3 of them.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. All right, so as to public health, the first amendment I'm going to make is, these are kind of technical, and if, just to save some time, if you would allow me to treat them together, there are 2 amendments which take the special fund balances that we amended earlier in the revenue section of the bill and puts them and appropriates them here, just changes these amounts to be the same. And so that would be for the Environmental Health Fund, the Department of Public Health Sanitary Inspection Services Fund, the Health Professionals Licensing Office Revolving Fund, and changes those here. Okay, so these are, sorry, it's amendment TMT L3-24, page 32. So the first one says
Thank you.
page 32 on the top. I'll just do it one by one. This one it's a change to the numbers here in Public Health's budget, and this is just to reflect the changes to the Environmental Health Fund, the Health Professional Licensing Office Revolving Fund, and the Office of Vital Statistics Fund, the Sanitary Inspection Revolving Fund. These special funds, earlier, we had, increased the numbers based on the projections, the revenue, and so now we're reflecting an increase in the expenditure side.
All right.
To match those increased revenue projections.
Okay. Does any of my colleagues like to speak to this amendment? There being none, Madam Speaker, if you can go ahead and close your amendment, and then we can, none. Are there any objection to this amendment? There being none, amendment passes. Your next amendment, Madam Speaker?
Thank you. The next one is line 15 to 16, page 39. Same thing. This is the Office of Vital Statistics. The wording, changing the amount to reflect the increased revenue amount that we put in earlier in the bill.
All right. Are there any colleagues who like to speak to this amendment? I see no hands. Madam Speaker, you'd like to close?
No, thank you.
None. Are there any objection? There being none, amendment passes. Your final amendment, ma'am.
No, I think I have 2 more. So one is,
all right.
all right. So in last year's budget, we had found that according, that FY2020, there was a fund balance in the Healthy Futures Fund, and we had tried to put that towards public health. So the audit showed that there was 14.1 million fund balance at the end of FY2020. And so we had allocated a portion towards public health and a portion towards the Guam Cancer Trust Fund. So my amendment here, and it's numbered TMT page 40, is to just recognize that that fund balance is still owing to the Department of Public Health and Social Services. So it would add notwithstanding any other provision of law, the unexpended balance of the Healthy Futures Fund appropriated to the Department of Public Health from fiscal year 2020 fund balance in Section 19 of Chapter 3, Public Law 3599, and the fiscal year 2021 fund balance shall continue to be available to the department to fully expend it.
All right, ma'am, and this is an add, this add is a new
Add a
section?
new section, correct.
Okay, it's similar to like the rollover.
Okay.
Continue to use it and to expend it, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Senator, colleagues like to speak, and I see the hand of Senator Tello. Senator Tello.
So just want to say, Mr. Chair, Mr. Chair, if I'm not mistaken, earlier we increased the Healthy Futures Fund by about $700,000. And some of that funding has already been appropriated to one other area. And I think the balance that's left over, if I can have OFB tell me what the balance of is of that 700,000.
If I could, Mr. Chair.
Point of information?
Yeah, point of information. The increased amount of revenue is projections for revenue during FY22. I'm talking about a fund balance that was there prior from the FY2020 audit.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. And that's, Senator Tello, you may continue. You wanted OFB to tell you
Yes, just the balance because.
what's the balance for
Yeah.
21? Because we're not talking about
No, I'm
22.
sorry. Okay, we're talking about 2022.
Okay, because on 22, Senator Tello, that's not what she's addressing. She's addressing whatever's left over from public health.
21.
To roll it over 21
21.
into.
Oh, okay.
Okay, that's what her motion is.
Okay, but if I can, Mr. Chair, I just, give me 1 minute and I'll explain what I'm trying to do.
All right,
Thank you.
okay.
And in the meantime, can Steve tell us what the balance is? We've already appropriated some of the increase that we provided
Yes.
in this from 700. We spent some of it. How much is left over?
All right, okay, Steve, can I, want to recess? We'll have a quick recess, all right? Committee of the Whole is returned, we're back in order. Senator Tello, I think your question was answered.
Yes, thank you,
All
Mr.
right.
Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, are there any objections to the amendment proffered by Speaker Terlai? Or correction, does any other colleague would like to speak to the amendment? There being none, are there any objections to the amendment proffered by Speaker Terlai? There being none, amendment passes. Speaker, you have one more.
Thank you. Thank you, colleagues, and thank you, Mr. Chair. The other amendment is for line 7, page 40. Line 7, page 40. This is, it's an appropriation that was made in a bill recently where we authorized the refinancing of the BPT bonds. And so in that bill, we put in this language that $5 million of the revenues that were projected to be saved in that refinancing for fiscal year 2021 and fiscal year 2022 would be appropriated to the Department of Public Health for the sole purpose of providing temporary assistance in the form of grants which shall be distributed to local nonprofit organizations that provide food and commodities for homeless individuals, unemployed individuals, children, low-income families until fully expended. My understanding is that this has not been received by Public Health, and so I wanted to just put it into this budget bill to ensure that they will receive it and that this food will become available, because with PUA ending, we all know how, this need is just increasing and increasing. So this is just to reflect that law in this budget bill, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Does any colleague would like to speak to that? There being none, Senator Blas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I support the amendment. Again, I have to bring the concern, though, that this amendment reflects on current fiscal year obligation. Is this the appropriate place to put it, or is miscellaneous section the place to put this?
Point of information, Mr. Chair. It affects both 2021 and 2022. Exactly what the law did was 2021, 2022. And
Senator Blas, OLB said it's okay to put it here.
Oh,
I understand where you're coming from on the miscellaneous.
Okay, I just want to make sure that
Yes.
it doesn't, we're not combining 21 numbers with 22 numbers. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Any other colleague would like to speak to this amendment? There being none, are there any objection to this amendment? There being none, amendment passes. Madam Speaker, do you have any more amendments? I think you're done, right? One more?
you come back to me, there's one that's being uploaded right now.
All right, Senator Torres, you do have an amendment. Public health. We're on public health, and then once we complete public health, then we'll go back to what was bookmarked. All right, Senator Torres, which is GMH.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The amendment that I'd like to proffer is MCT L21 P34. This is page 34 of the bill. Sorry, am I in the right place? Is that the correct, is that where we last left off? No. Okay,
Yes, I
hang on.
think that's MCT L21P34. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So, Mr. Chair, to be clear, this amendment, as well as others I will be proffering, do not provide an appropriation for nurse pay. This merely mandates that a portion of the agency's current budget be used to fund the salary adjustment of the nurse professional pay structure. As a reminder, the current budget levels, particularly in the health agencies, do not contemplate the 15% base salary increase. That is why a clear funding request was made to your office. A week prior to convening in budget, my office inquired with yours to confirm whether funding for these adjustments was in fact included. The response my office received per your analysts was that the governor's request to fund the nurse pay was not included due to, quote, very tight allocations from projected revenue levels, unquote. And so, Mr. Chair, I just wanted very clear and on the record that OFB did not include this in the fiscal year 2022 budget. And opining that the agencies can absorb the costs is not the same thing as providing the requested amounts. That said, I am proffering this amendment and others like it to ensure that these long-awaited increases can continue and are not deprioritized in the next fiscal year. And I ask my colleagues for their support. This amendment to line 21, page 34, is to add a new section 4 to part 1 of chapter 3 of the bill to read, Section 4, Nurse Pay, Professional Pay Structure. The sum of $1,252,180 shall be allocated from the general fund in Section 3 of this part of this chapter for the sole purpose of funding adjustments to the Government of Guam nurse professional pay structure in fiscal year 2022.
Thank you. Thank you, Senators. Just for my colleagues, what we discussed a week ago about this, that they can pay for it. So, does any colleague like to speak to this amendment? If not, Senator Nelson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to, I know you said, how is it that they're able to pay out this $1,252,000? How is it that they're able to pay out if we write the line item in and we don't provide the additional funding?
How are they able to pay? As we discussed last week, there's funding within their vacancies. They can afford it. It's not like they have a long list of people waiting to be employed. There's funds there.
How
so
much do they have?
They can be able to absorb it.
Okay, how much do they have in their vacancies?
How much available in vacancies? If you can.
Total dollar value of vacancies in public health right now in their budget is $2.4 million.
Okay.
If I may comment, Senators, you know, one of the things we do in budgeting is we try to accommodate departments' requests as much as possible. And there are some areas of the budget that we normally consider, and there's some that we use as a mechanism to see what we can fund and what we can't fund. In the past, aside from last year, we tried to fund all the vacancies, especially in the larger departments, the critical ones, health, education, and safety. But you also have to remember that when we fund anywhere from 50 to 100 positions, you're tying up all that money in the event that these positions are going to be filled. Historically, and if you look at the trend, most agencies never fund more than 50% of their vacancies for whatever reason. So I'm just trying to do the best I can to allocate revenues that we have available to these agencies to make sure they use it, but not so much tied up where we lock all this money in specific categories in the department's budget and they end up not using it, which we can actually use those monies to allocate to other areas of just as importance or even more. So when we do the analysis, we take into account, and there are departments that have historically for years are just unable to hire simply because of the difficulty, the technical type of positions you're asking for, and yet we set aside millions of dollars every year. And that's why at the end of the year, I'm always approached like, how come we're lapsing so much? Well, these are areas that personnel is one of the biggest object classes that we normally lapse in Gov Guam. It's because of the inability to fill these positions, even though the intent of the legislature is admirable in the beginning to provide funding. But I know from experience, it does not happen. And I'm just trying to express that to you and help you guys move along to get this budget to where we need to get. Not to shortchange agencies, not to say that, we didn't consider it. I'm just trying to do our best with whatever resources we have. And like, Senator Talaya said, there's a lot of statutes we still can fulfill, and simply because of the revenues. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Director, and thank you, Mr. Chair. I just, this makes sense because in FY20, we had a $19 million surplus, which means that we over-appropriated $19 million, and we still went below the executive budget request. So thank you.
Thank you. Senator Chris Duenas.
Jesus Masi, Mr. Chairman. And I certainly support the amendment. And I have to, continue to agree exactly with what the OB director is saying. I did 10 years in executive agencies, and he is exactly right. You walk to your ASO and, you look at an account, you look at what is due, and the famous statement is journal voucher. You move money through accounts. That is the managing tool that the executive branch has. Mr. Chairman, and especially for the chair, our speaker, Chairwoman on Health, and others, I know for a fact that if for some reason the stars aligned and everything was beautiful in the world of the government of Guam, and every, GG1 was issued and every position was filled, and wow, look at what we're tracking now, the full expenditure of these health agencies, the full expenditure of public safety, the full expenditure of all these agencies. We would be right back down here trying to figure out what we're going to do. But that's not the real world. The real world is up to 20 to 30% of most agencies' budgets are in budgeted vacancies and even sometimes in operations. And so I agree with the caution to be able to make sure the uncertainty going forward, particularly now, in the light of the last 3 and 4 days, is the prudent thing to do. Nobody is not going to follow through on the governor's decision to pay our nurses and increase their pay by 15%. Not one person in this hall is going to do that. But what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that we know these agencies have these fund balances, and as our good speaker, the Oversight for Health just had to put on the record, GMH requested $10 million less than what we were willing to give them. Half of that money, the $5 million alone, would have done everything what was being asked of us in terms of raising the appropriation level in general fund. So let's be abundantly clear. Nobody here is against this motion. I'm glad this is in here. I support it. I'm going to vote for it. But the budgeting tool so that the people of Guam understand, that's why I said in another, representation earlier, that it's always good news and bad news when the budget passes. The good news is you got your ceiling. The bad news is I just put a 15% reserve on you. But it's because BBMR knows. They know what's in that budget, and they know what money is available. And they are going to release GG1s, and they are going to release allotments, and they're going to do what they do so that they can protect the integrity of the finances while also prioritizing our government services. So I rise in support of this amendment. I don't have any problem with agencies setting aside and lockboxing funding for the priorities of their agencies, because we know they're going to have that ability to move money. And if for some reason, like I said, an amazing year happens where every GG1 is cut and every purchase order is given, and that agency is tracking to absolutely use every penny of their revenue, then doggone it, let's get our job done and move money from somewhere else and fund them properly. Jesus Masi, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Duenas. Does any other colleague like to speak? Senator Tello?
Sijus Masi, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, there's no doubt that everyone in this room wants to support those on the front line, not just nurses, but police officers, firemen, all those who are involved, who've had to be put in the forefront. And for GMH not to come to OFB or GMH not to mention these additional pay increases.
We're on public health?
Public health, I'm sorry, public
you.
health, sorry. And I think it was $17 million they undercut themselves, right, with
You're
regards to this.
you're referring to during the public
right,
hearing?
right,
The
yeah.
17? Okay.
I think it was
moving
17.
along.
But anyways, Mr. Chair, with regards to this funding here, is there any, okay, maybe I should ask OFB this. If we change shall to may in this amendment, does that give flexibility for the funding to come from ARP money instead of the general fund? But if we put shall allocate from the general fund, then the money has to come from there?
If you're asking me whether or not shall is more restrictive or more enforceable rather than the word may in terms of funding sources, I don't know what the regulations and restrictions are on the RIP right now, funds. But on the general fund, there would be no restrictions because the law is specific. So that's, to me right now, to answer your question, that's the only reason why I would, if the intent is to make sure this is done, I think the amendment is specifically identifying the general fund and actually giving the order to have it done. Whereas if the ARP, we can change the word to may and possibly use the ARP funds as a fund source. But as today's Senator, I don't know what the restrictions are on the use of those ARP funds, so.
Yeah, but the question was, if we used may, it can be flexible with regards, and Mr. Chair, you said this is public health. Mr. Chair, we're on page 34, correct? This amendment is on page 34? So we're on Guam Memorial Hospital.
Oh, I think that was supposed to have been 35. The amendment should have been on
Okay, so
35. So we
we're-
can make that administrative corrections. But moving along on your any comments you have on this amendment?
Yeah, okay. I just want to make sure I'm on the right amendment, and the one I'm looking at is at L21, page 34. Is that correct?
Senator Tello?
Yes, yes. We're on amendment right now, and I'm just trying to
Senator
find out.
Torres coordinated with us, and we may have given her the wrong page, but this is only intended to make sure the nurse pay is funded. So I think that's the gist of it. We'll do a recess to make the changes because this is the guidance we provided her. Okay, we provided Senator Torres the guidance of exactly what page and so forth. So we can make the correction, but it's specifically to make sure that the agencies pay the nurses, okay? Her amendment, look at her amendment. It's
Tell us
page
what you, yeah.
34. It's the one, it should have been 35. Let's take a quick recess and we'll take the administrative corrections so we just put the right page. But it's still with the intent to have the agencies. Now, when you refer to ARP's intent is to cover shortfalls. If we're trying to cause a shortfall, then of course, if ARP can cover it, they'll cover it. But the shall ensures their funding that was discussed earlier. Their personnel vacancies can cover it. So, but we'll take a short recess so we can make the corrections, all right? Committee of the Whole is back in order. My colleagues, as I asked Senator Torres to go to page 34, it was supposed to have been line 7, page 40, her amendment. And it reflects the nurses' professional pay structure. Senator Torres, if we can go ahead and finish that one off, and I apologize for directing you to page 34 when it should have been page 40 on the public health area. And it's basically the same statement, except it's the amount is 1.753,490.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the amendment that we are proffering is to line 7, page 40. It is to add a new section 16 to part 2 of chapter 3 of the bill to read, section 16, nurse professional pay structure. The sum of $1,753,490 shall be allocated from the general fund in section 1 of this part of this chapter for the sole purpose of funding adjustments to the nurse professional pay structure in fiscal year 2022. And I most humbly ask my colleagues for their support. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Torres. And my colleagues, just to advise you that, if I'm correct, the question that Senator Nelson asked was in relationship to public health, to identify that there was 2.5 in vacancies funding. And if I'm correct, Senator Duenas was in support of this in reference to public health. So to get back on track for you, Senator Tello, we're on L7, page 40. We're talking about the same thing, and the same question you asked about for funding, that was answered. So do you have any further comment on this amendment?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think we've been over this throughout this whole session, for budget session, to discuss the funding for the nurses. And like I said, I don't think there's anybody in here that doesn't want to support, the nurses, or anybody for that matter on the front line. But I think, by restricting this particular amendment to the general fund, when ARP funding can, the ARP funding can also cover this. But when you're saying the word shall be allocated from the general fund, you're doing such that, you're restricting it. What if the governor, who said that if there's any shortfall, because it's obvious during public health, they were $17 million short from what they asked for last year, and they admittedly said that they're expecting funding from the ARP, admittingly. In fact, you asked them, Mr. Chair, for a list of those areas that wanted to be covered by ARP money. So knowing that, Mr. Chair, I think that we should allow that flexibility, considering they undercut themselves this year, and change the word. It's a simple amendment, just to change the word shall to may. And that would give the flexibility for the governor to pay this pay raise that she put into place through an MOU, and allow that to happen. So it's as simple as that. Just an amendment from shall to may, so that we're not restricting the payment.
So your amendment to the amendment is to change the shall to may. Does
Yes, Mr.
any
Chair.
colleague would like to speak to that, the may and the shall? Senator, you object to that? Senator Brown, before I ask anybody else?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm not here to lecture you this morning or question the integrity of your financial department division here that has been spending all these many days and hours working on this budget. But I do support the position taken by Senator Tello to open up that option should they need it and should they need to use it. As I mentioned from the very beginning of this budget, I think we should do everything we can to maximize having the administration use these federal funds in the areas where they're most critically needed, and areas obviously where we will come to very clear consensus have been directly impacted as a result of this pandemic. We discussed this over and over again, and yet we're still at the same point. I mean, no one's arguing, but again, I'm going to point out, Mr. Chairman, as I mentioned, gosh, I don't know, was it last week, whenever we started in this process, the governor made this decision to make this grand announcement that she's going to increase the salary of the nurses. I think we recognize the situation that we're in. and the important work that the nurses and other medical health care professionals are providing to our community in this time of crisis. So nobody's arguing that. But the governor decided she's going to make this grand public announcement about the nurses' pay. So I'm not concerned about the ability of GovGuam agencies that have these nurses, be it public health, GMH, DOE, because the governor made this determination on her own that she was going to do the nurses' pay, irrelevant of the Guam Legislature. So I'm not worried that she's not going to have these departments that are under her oversight pay the nurses. And as Mr. Guerrero has repeatedly told us, in looking at the budget, the funds had been set aside for that. I mean, sure, it comes down to wanting to recognize who's going to be the one to move this amendment and say, oh, and write my press release that we funded the nurses' pay. But this decision was made without engagement of this legislature, maybe certain members of the legislature, but the body of the whole having this discussion never happened. Earlier this year, we were asked to pass legislation to do a study on nurses' pay. And as mentioned previously, we've not seen that study. We've not seen the study in terms of what the determination or evaluation is with regards to nurses' pay. And I think we need to do it responsibly, because this is not the only department or agency that's going to want to come before this legislature and ask for an increase on their pay. We have language looking at, how are we going to address law enforcement? As if we have an endless pot of money, then everybody else, maybe the teachers are next. The line is long of everyone who wants a pay increase. But we need to be responsible with regards to what we're doing. And I don't argue the information. I've not questioned the integrity of Mr. Guerrero and the rest of your team that is working on the budget. I have no reason to question the information that's been provided to us. We may have a different perspective on it, and certainly we can debate that. But the department and agencies, if the funds are already allocated in their budget, then let's give the administration the latitude, since the governor decided, as she has done repeatedly with a whole bunch of things lately, to make these decisions arbitrarily on her own. And yet we're asked to come here and essentially do the mopping up, the cleaning up after the fact, after decisions have already been made, without any engagement with this body or the public as a whole to be engaged in this discussion. And I'm not in the business of doing that, Mr. Chairman. I mean, I'm going to call it like it is. If that's what it is, then by all means, let me call it like it is. Because I know there are other agencies that would love to see increases, but colleagues, let's not forget where we're at while we're tripping over ourselves to take credit that we're the great saviors here. Because this is all going to come home to roost to us soon. Be it next budget year, because I'm very curious to see how we go between now and next budget year looking at these issues. So I think there's nothing wrong with giving them the latitude, because I don't question, if the governor has made this pronouncement, I'm assuming she's going to make sure her directors fall in line and make sure that they pay and prioritize the nurses' pay. I think that's fairly obvious, since again, for the record, she's decided to do this all on her very own. So with that, I rise in support of the amendment by Senator Tello. Thank you very much,
All right,
Mr.
thank you. We do have an objection that was stated by Senator Nelson. Does anyone else like to speak to this amendment? Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have no objection to changing may to shall. I'm trying to figure out for myself whether either of them, or even this whole language itself, prohibits the governor from using ARP funds or any other funds for these purposes. I think it's clear that, I checked with all my agencies, and they are all processing nurse pay at the new rates. And yes, the study was completed. It's complete. So there are nurse pay increases that have been accepted, and they are being paid by most agencies. If not being paid already, I think public health is the last one. They're processing it, so they should see it in their next paycheck if they haven't seen it already. And I think because the pay increases are accepted, they are legal obligations, there's no way they're not going to be paid. I'm not worried about them being paid. I'm actually, just glad that they were finally adjusted. Those adjustments, according to prior law again, were in the books since the 80s at the very least, that we were supposed to be adjusting nurse pay as we went along to make sure that we can retain and recruit nurses. And we were supposed to be giving sufficient scholarship amounts so that we will never have a shortage of nurses anymore. That's what prior legislature's vision was. So, I am thankful that we finally, implemented it. GMH implemented nurse raises before the study was done. They had rejected funding from us and decided they had enough and already implemented nurse pay increments, especially to recruit those in ICU and emergency room. They're giving, additional incentives for those areas. And so I support all of these efforts, and I don't actually have any objection to this allocation that we're going to require that part of the money given to public health from the general fund is going to be allocated to nurse pay. There's no harm in it. I don't know. Yeah, I would like to tell any nurse that's not getting their pay raised to come see me, because that's a problem. They're entitled to it already, as far as I'm concerned. That study has been adopted. It's been implemented by some agencies. And if there's some agencies that are slow in implementing it, then that's a problem. But as far as I know, the agencies under my jurisdiction that I've checked are all in line with the adjustments to nurse pay. And I want to thank OFB for confirming that, yes, they are able to accommodate this in their budgets. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Does anyone else like to speak? I know Senator Torres, you like to speak, ma'am, on this? No. Anyone else? No one? Okay, there is an objection to it.
I'd like to close.
Oh, you want to close? Go ahead and close, Senator Tello, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And then thank you to my colleagues who spoke on supporting this amendment. I think it was very clear that this is something that we want to allow the flexibility for this agency to utilize. I mean, we all know that there's money, there in the art funding. In fact, it kind of, this whole thing about the nurses' pay, when I believe GMH, if I'm not mistaken, had increased this pay raise way back even before, like the speaker had mentioned, even before we even started this session. I think even before that, I think it was in June or July, that there was a resolution through Guam, at least Guam Memorial Hospital. They had a resolution to increase the pay raise, even before we had this bill that did ask for the salary increase. So, what's really good too, Mr. Chair, is the fact that the public is watching and they're listening to what we have to say, and they're putting two and two together. They're understanding what we're doing here. They understand that all we're doing is allowing a flexibility to use that art money. And that's all this amendment does, is allows for flexibility. It doesn't stop them, because it's already been mentioned several times, Mr. Chair, that the salary increase has already been implemented. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. There's an objection to the amendment. All in favor of the amendment proffered by Senator Tello, please raise your hand. Amendment fails. We will now go to the amendment of the original amendment. Would anybody like to speak to that amendment? None. Senator Torres, would you like to close on your amendment, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to make a couple points of information and clarification. And I want to thank everybody for recognizing the need to take care of our nurses at the frontliners. But what I want to point out is all these efforts, this is a accumulation of efforts throughout this time about the nurses, how to address the nursing crisis, nursing shortage, retention and recruitment efforts. There was a public law 24325 which established the Nurse and Other Healthcare Professional Recruitment and Retention Incentives Act of 1998. The provisions of this act paved the way and provided tools for the Director of Administration to furnish incentives for the nursing and healthcare professionals. this is what we're doing. We're just continuing on that effort that was started to address how to incentivize nurses and healthcare professionals on Guam to address the healthcare needs. It is true that our Guam Memorial Hospital passed a board resolution for nurse differential a while back, but it was also recognized by the Department of Administration that he, in fact, through statute, is required to establish the pay adjustment schedules throughout the government. And so the efforts by the Department of Administration and my efforts in this body have been to make it in conformance with the law by providing funding, identifying funding, making sure that where funding is available and if it's sufficient, that those identified amounts are in fact allocated. And so this is the first of a series of amendments to allocate those funds to make sure that if in fact they're already accounting for the nurse pay increase, which was authorized by the governor in July, that we then take it further and make sure that they have the money allocated, that it doesn't get deprioritized, especially now. So this amendment is essentially that. It's just to allocate from their general fund to make sure that where these, if they in fact are already been done, then it's good. It will be accounted for, it's allocated, and the nurses will be provided for. And so I think that everybody's good intention will be satisfied by these amendments to make sure that our nurses are taken care of, if in fact that is our desire. And that has only been my desire. And I just want to point out that, again, where there's a misconception that they didn't ask for it, it's not needed. In fact, it was asked for directly that it be funded. And if we've now come to the agreement or the assumption that there's sufficient funds in their general fund allocation, then the allocation is appropriate. So I ask my colleagues to please support this amendment. And let's put our money where our mouth is. Let's take care of our nurses if in fact that is what we want to do. If in fact in this COVID crisis where we're seeing 100 positive cases, and those nurses are the ones dealing with these sick people, let's in fact put our money where our mouth is and put our hearts where, if we say they are where they are, let's put our action to good use. Pass this and the other series of amendments to allocate funding to the nurse pay plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Torres. Okay.
Why? Okay.
Well, now, does anybody object to this amendment before we move to vote? I just need to see a hand if there's an objection. Are there any objections? There are no objections, so there's no required to move for a vote. This amendment passes. Okay, now, let me take a quick recess so I can make sure I get the right amendment that's next, and I don't jump into a section I shouldn't have. All right? Excuse me. A quick recess. committee of whole is back in order. We're still on public health. Madam Speaker, you have another amendment, and for my colleagues, please refresh your drive because I had to do that to see it. It's on line, it's identified as SB 55 TMTL3, page 38. All right? Madam Speaker, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this amendment is to Section 7 of the bill, which is the Public Health Social Services Continuing Appropriation Authorization for MIP and Medicaid Operations. So currently, the bill provides that the unexpended balance of appropriations from general fund and special funds for MIP and Medicaid and operations in fiscal year 2021 and 2022 shall not revert, shall be available until fully expended. I'm adding in the words fiscal year 2020 because we are informed that there was a $3.6 million appropriation for fiscal year 2020 that I think public health will need for local match for these Medicaid programs. So, yeah, if I could just explain a little bit. So public health's overall budget is, they had requested at the hearing 17 million less in the general fund than what was given to them in FY21. And they requested 5.9 million more in special funds. So about an 11 million less overall request from them, but OFB, they were able to give public health all the way up to 3 million less than FY21, which I want to commend them for again. And they increased the amount for Medicaid by 500,000 than last year. So I want to commend them for that as well, because as we know, the more money we can put into Medicaid, the more federal matching money we can get for Guam, and with the changing FMAP. So right now, we're operating with a certain FMAP, but it's undetermined what that is going to be for FY22. So I think the more local funds we can put in there, the more we can ensure, first of all, that we can access even more of the federal funds under the current FMAP percentages. But if it changes and it goes down again, it's going to really be critical that we are able to put as much money in there as possible, despite the 500,000 increase that was put into Medicaid in FY22 according to our budget. So the 13.7 million in the FY22 budget will get us 59.4 million in federal funds if the FMAP is 83% versus 17%. If it goes down, to 55%, then, it's even more critical. So this year, the 13 million in local match was able to get us 127 million. And that's using an 89% match. It's fantastic, of course, but that's because of COVID. So it's not clear that that's going to continue. So, there's still a chance the FMAP is going to be reduced, and we need as much local match available to access as much federal Medicaid money as we can. And I think I don't have to explain to my colleagues about, this Medicaid is going to cover all those who are not employed. It's going to cover some of those who are employed, but yet their income is, still keeping them in these poverty levels. And that is a significant portion of our population to date. So I want to ask my colleagues for their support in this amendment to just ensure that at least 3.6 million more of local match might be made available by this amendment. Sidos Masi.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Does any of my colleagues like to speak to this amendment? There being none, are there any objection to this amendment? There being none, amendment passes.
Thank you.
Do you have any more amendments? We'll just take a quick recess before I say we're going to go back to a bookmark, okay? The committee of the whole is back in order. My colleagues, we will now close the public health section at this point. And as requested by Senator Nelson, we bookmark the Chapter 3 Health on Part 1, Guam Memorial Hospital. But first, we will now close first public health. Okay? Now we're going to go back to the bookmark of GMH, and I think there's only one amendment, and that's NGMH, and that was proffered by Senator Torres. Senator Torres, I apologize for the previous. It is SB 55 MCT L21, page 34. Senator Torres, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I proffer an amendment to line 21, page 34, to add a new section 4 to part 1 of chapter 3 of the bill to read, section 4, nurse professional pay structure. The sum of $1,252,180 shall be allocated from the general fund in section 3 of this part of this chapter for the sole purpose of funding adjustments to the Government of Guam nurse professional pay structure in fiscal year 2022. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Torres. And so that no one has to ask the question that was proffered on the last agency, there is $5.8 million in vacancy at GMH. Okay, so that will settle that. Senator Tello, you have a question or a comment or?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I'd like to make an amendment to the amendment, and that is from changing shall to may, to allow the flexibility of using ARP money to pay this salary increase. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Does anyone would like to speak to that amendment? I think that was heard on the last agency, but if anybody wants to speak again on this agency, Guam Memorial Hospital, on the amendment proffered by Senator Tello, are there any objection to the amendment, the shall to may? There's two. All in favor, okay, you want to close, do you need to close on that one, Senator? Thank you. All in favor of Senator Teller's amendment from the shall to may, please raise your hand. Motion fails. Now back to the original amendment. Does any other colleague would like to speak on the Senator Torres' amendment? None. Are there any objection to the amendment? None. Motion passes. Amendment passes. Oh, I apologize, Senator Torres, I didn't ask you to close. Did you need to close? Okay, thank you. Now,
If I could still bookmark it, GMH.
you still want to bookmark it? Okay, is there any objection to the bookmark? There being none, GMH is bookmarked. We will now move to we're on part 3, Guam behavioral. Am I correct? Okay, and there is an amendment. Oh, there's an amendment by there's only one. We only have one amendment, my colleagues, and it'll reflect SB 55 MCT L10, page 42. All right. So if you can see it on your drive, refresh, and you'll see it there. Senator Torres. Ma'am, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The amendment that I'd like to proffer is to line 10, page 42. And this is to add a new section 7 to part 3 of chapter 3 of the bill to read. Section 7, nurse professional pay structure. The sum of $488,521 shall be allocated from the Healthy Futures Fund in section 1 of this part of this chapter to the Guam Behavioral Health and Wellness Center for the sole purpose of funding the nurse professional pay structure in fiscal year 2022. And I respectfully ask continued support by my colleagues.
Thank you, Senator Torres. And so that we're not going to be asking the same question we asked the other two, there is $2.1 million in vacancy in that agency. So, does anyone would like to speak to the amendment? Senator Tello?
Mr. Chair, again, giving the governor or the agency the flexibility in case the governor provides ARP funding to this agency, it's important to allow that to happen. And now you're tapping into general fund, and this just allows that flexibility, Mr. Chair. I think it's very important that we leave all options open, especially if we need general fund money to pay for other things that ARP money that cannot pay for. So actually, it's coming from the Healthy Futures Fund, it's looking like. We're on page, 42, line 10, Mr. Chair, is that the correct one?
Yes.
Okay.
Senator Tello,
I'm wrong. Yeah, I'm looking at the wrong one. Sorry, Mr. Chair.
Not a problem, but I just want to make it very clear as I speak to OFB,
Yeah.
that whole agency is funded by Healthy Future Fund.
Yes, that is,
So
Mr. Chair.
that's why she's just allocating it within their funds, it shall be paid. That's the
Okay.
only reason for that. And that's why I identified the $2.1 million in Healthy Future Fund in that agency are vacancies. So that's why she was asking that the agency funded like we have stated last week.
Okay, again, Mr. Chair, okay, we are online. I just want to make sure. I know we've made a mistake earlier. I just don't want to make it again. Line 10, page 4. This is under a Behavioral Wellness Center, and this amendment is to 488. 520 shall be allocated from the Healthy Futures Fund, right? Okay, that's already in this part. However, Mr. Chair, especially because it's coming from the Healthy Futures Fund instead of the general fund, we know that even now we're tracking less amount in the Healthy Futures Fund today. So this may not even be realized. And I asked earlier during this budget session, in the event that Healthy Futures Fund, particularly Healthy Futures Fund, does not track or produce what projected revenues are, what happens then? Which agency would not be able to get their full funding? And according to OFB, it was said that it would be across the board. Usually, if it doesn't trail, then it would be across the board that everybody would have a share in, not receiving some kind of funding from this. But then again, it all depends on BBMR, right? Because BBMR is the one that holds the purse strings, and they're the one that allocates the funding to those agencies. But technically, it should be across the board for everyone when it comes to Healthy Futures Fund. So now we're relying on something that may not come in. And you're saying shall be allocated. And once again, Mr. Chair, making my point that at least put may in the event there is no funding in this area. And that's all what I'm trying to do here. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Does anyone would like to speak to the amendment of Senator Tello? None? Are there any, Madam Speaker, did you want to speak to that? I saw your hand moving, so I wasn't too sure. Yes? She wanted to change the shall to may.
Yes, and I just wanted to confirm with OFB that the Guam Behavioral Health and Wellness Center's budget overall is about 4.5 million less than what they received last year from the Healthy Futures Fund. Well, they're for operations, and that, so they're saying that there are 2.1 million in vacancies, and with this reduction in overall Healthy Futures funds for operations, but that they are still able to pay the nurses currently with this amount. Is that correct?
With the total amount of vacancies listed in their staffing pattern for FY22, yes, my assumption, your assumption is correct that they would be able to pay for this if they choose to.
When you say that there's that much in vacancies, do you mean that they could actually hire $2.1 million more worth of personnel today? They're authorized to do that?
They're authorized to spend up to 2.1 to recruit anytime during FY22. But like I said, historically, I've never seen an agency as large, I mean, you're talking about larger agencies, that have ever been able to fill 50% of their vacancies simply because, like in the case of health, these positions are technical. They're doctors, they're nurses, they're physicians, they're psychologists, they're social workers. We all know that we don't have that pool, that market here on Guam, so that's what makes it so difficult. So the chances of recruiting these positions October 1st is very unlikely, simply because we need to get the GG1 out first. It takes a couple of weeks to announce it. It takes a couple of weeks to process. It takes a couple of weeks to interview. So by the time that whole process is gone, 3 months can go by. So if you take the lapses of 2.1 million, 25% of that, that's the amount of money that's actually already available.
That's right. And I received a message from the Director of Behavioral Health that they are in the middle of recruiting psychiatrists, sorely needed one, of course, and other professional services. So they do need those those lapses for these to recruit, and that they do intend to fill these positions, and we need them to. So, but I think, so I just wanted to clarify that with you. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else like to speak to the Senator Tello's amendment? There being none, are there an objection to Senator Tello's amendment? There is two. All in favor of Senator Tello's amendment, please raise your hand. Motion fails. We're back to the amendment. Does anyone like to speak to Senator Torres' amendment? There being, Madam Speaker.
Well, again, just generally on behavioral health. So I just want to confirm, we are currently paying the increase in nursing pay, behavioral health, that they're entitled to that. They should be being paid, and if they're not, then they really need to bring that up if they're listening with their director or us, because there's an issue. And I want to clarify, too, that the reduction to Guam Behavioral Health and Wellness overall appropriation was due to the governor's request. And that, but if they are allowed, are they going to be allowed to use lapses?
Right now, as the way the bill is presented, I don't see a provision here that allows them to use any of their lapses if we're talking about FY22.
All right, so just want to make sure again, that we are able to fund the nursing pay, and we are able to fund the 2.1 million in professional positions that are currently vacant during FY22. Is that correct?
I would safely say at this point, Senator, based on the total amount of vacancies of 2.1 million and the cost of implementing the reclass of $488,521, I think they're very much capable of doing so.
Great, thank you. And I noticed that the behavioral health budget for detox was increased from 800,000 to 2 million, and that's a direct appropriation from Healthy Futures Fund specifically for inpatient detox, and I want to thank OFB for that. Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Are there anyone else like to speak to this? There being none, Senator Torres, would you like to close on your amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to make sure everybody understands that yes, the authorization for nurse pay increases and differential pay was authorized in June, I believe took effect August, so it has started, and the whole issue here is how to continue it into the fiscal year 2022, and this allocation will ensure that the monies are identified to be paid for nurse professional pay structure. So I respectfully ask for my colleagues' continued support on this amendment to take care of our nurses, especially at behavioral health.
Thank you, Senator Torres. Are there any objection to the amendment? There being none, amendment passes. We will now move to please be advised that we're still bookmarking GMAs. Senator Paris, I think you have an amendment coming up. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, just would like to bookmark this chapter. There's an amendment that I would like to make that I haven't yet.
So we'll continue the bookmark. It's still bookmarked?
Yeah.
Because the speaker wanted to bookmark.
Okay, great, thanks.
Correction, it's Guam Behavioral we're on. Okay, so that we're going to bookmark that one.
Great, thank you.
Okay, does any objection to that? There being none, Guam Behavioral is bookmarked. Now we're going to move into Chapter 4 or Part 4. Part 4, Department of Integrated Service for Individuals with Disability. Okay, is this the only amendment? Okay, we only have one amendment, and that's proffered by, and it's found on SB 55 ALS L20, page 43. My colleagues, if you can't see it in your drive, please refresh it. No, it's Part 4. That's why I said it's Part 4, it's Chapter 3 still. Okay? Chapter 3 and page 43. Yes. Senator Shelton, are you ready? You have an amendment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and this is Amendment SB 55 LS L20P43. It's on line 20, page 43, to add a new Section 2, Part 4 of Chapter 3 of the bill to read Section 2, Job Coaches. The sum of $68,738 from the Healthy Futures Fund shall be allocated from the appropriation in Section 1 of this part of this chapter for job coaches to assist individuals with disabilities to maintain gainful employment. Notwithstanding any other provision of law, the unexpended balance of funds appropriated to the Department of Integrated Services for Individuals with Disabilities for job coaches for fiscal year 2021 and prior shall not lapse and shall continue to be available until fully funded. Mr. Chair, this is an amendment to add a new section into DISID's budget to be funded from their Healthy Futures appropriation. This is the sum of $68,000 for job coaches. These are positions that exist already in the department, and as you know, in previous budgets, we've added this in its own specific section to protect these positions, to ensure that are individuals with disabilities who are working within the government of Guam have the job coaches that are needed that allow them the opportunity to continue working, to lead lives of independence and financial security. Job coaches, they're employed to help individuals with disabilities learn, accommodate, and perform their work duties. They may work with individuals one-on-one or in very small groups. They make significant contributions in providing individuals with meaningful, gainful employment, gain self-esteem, and long-term financial security. When we have adults with disabilities who want to work and want the satisfaction of providing for themselves, we must do everything we can to support these individuals with the resources that they need, Mr. Chair. And this amendment simply seeks to maintain our investment in our people.
Thank you. Does any of my colleagues like to speak to this, Senator Tello?
So just Mr. Chair, I'd like to ask OFB a question.
All right.
If I may, in the 2021 budget, job coaches were included in the last budget. I noticed that the request from DICIT was exactly what they were getting, the agency's request at 1.49028 from General Fund and the Healthy Futures Fund. They got exactly what they requested for. But yet, I don't see anything in here under job coaches that they requested for. So maybe that's the reason why you didn't put it in there, but please explain to me if they did later on request for this. Maybe there's something late on.
In the FY21 budget, Senator,
It was included.
it was there. It is in the FY21 budget. It's an allocation from their appropriation. In FY22, they didn't specifically ask for it, but my understanding, my understanding is there are employees still there under the job coach program. How are they being funded going forward? I don't know, but I think it's maybe prudent at this fact to maybe consider providing appropriations, or at least identifying appropriations to pay for those positions.
Thank you, Steve. Mr. Chair, I'd like to ask the author of this amendment a question, please.
Sure.
Okay. During the public hearing we had on budget for this particular agency, was it mentioned in here at all that they needed the funding for job coaches and it was a continuation?
Would the author yield to the question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. To my recollection, job coaches were not mentioned during the budget hearing, but my understanding is that the director and the deputy director from the department are in support of this amendment.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay,
Senator
thank
Tadaway?
you. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Anyone else on the amendment? Speaker Talahi, you're recognized.
Yeah, I have no objection to job coaches. I only would like to give the discretion to DICIT. DICIT is underfunded. They are not able to provide services to all of the population of Guam that is in dire need of these services. And they need to be able to use their money that's very limited here. No federal matching funds have been provided to them to try to get more, if possible, and to try to cover as many people as possible and critical services, especially with COVID. So I would just like to give them that discretion. It is a very, very limited situation for them. And so I guess I would make an amendment to change the word shall to may, because I'd like to give them that discretion when they're getting so little of what they need. I know, the mover of the amendment is saying that the director's in support. In every meeting I've had with them, they are asking for flexibility in their budget in every way so that they can take care of the needs of the people of Guam with disabilities, all of them. And and I have no objection to carrying over the lapses and all of that and giving them this flexibility. And so if they have people on staff to do this, that's fine, no objection. But I just want them to be able to prioritize what they need to do.
Just to clarify, Madam Speaker, is the amendment to change shall to may? And it says shall in numerous parts of this. So is it to change every part that says shall to may, or just one area?
The part that says it shall be allocated, that shall. So that it may be allocated.
Senator Nelson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can perhaps just an inquiry to the primary sponsor of the amendment. Are there currently people in these positions as job coaches?
I'm sorry, this question is for the
For the
main amendment?
primary sponsor of the amendment.
Do you yield?
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you very much. And the answer is yes, these jobs are filled at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the primary sponsor for yielding. So I don't have any problems with keeping the word shall in. There are already people fulfilling these positions now, and it looks that they will need a continued appropriation that was somehow overlooked. And there are many amendments that we've passed that have the word shall, in some instances changed may to shall. So I'd have to object to this amendment by the amendment to the amendment.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. Anyone else on the amendment? Senator Brown.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I would rise in support of it. I think, as mentioned earlier, with the issue with regards to funding the nurses, providing these departments the flexibility to look at other sources of funding if needed to ensure that the payments are made, I think is a reasonable request. I think by limiting this, we actually think we're helping them. But if they have other sources available that they can manage, of course, anyone who's run a department knows they have the ability to do that. If they don't, they certainly can always bring that concern up to the legislature if they're running short. But ultimately, the objective is to keep these people that are providing this service funded. I'm sure if they weren't, we'd hear about it very quickly. So I don't know why we continue to object when we're simply allowing them flexibility to do so, so that they can pay these personnel and make sure they're able to continue to do the important work that they're doing. So I rise in support of the amendment by the Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Senator Taitigui.
Sidus Masi, Mr. Chair, and I too rise in support of this amendment, allowing the flexibility. You know, Mr. Chair, if there's several of us who've been in agencies, who ran agencies before, either in a capacity as a director or a deputy director, and understand, you know, the importance of being able to fund things that are prioritizing certain things. And, you know, sometimes the legislature tends to micromanage, you know, these agencies and make it difficult. Thing is, we're not in their agency. We're not there daily to see the day-to-day operations and know the importance of allowing the flexibility, you know, for them to be able to accommodate for everything, being able to share that wealth around to different agencies. And when we're in this legislature, we understand the importance of that when we're sitting here, but can you imagine what it's like sitting in that agency, which some of us have had the opportunity to do? I mean, with that experience alone is wealth of knowledge, and especially when you have other people who are raising in support of changing shall to may, and why that's so important to do so. So I rise in full support of this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Titlegy. Anyone else on the amendment? Senator San Augustine, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, I rise in objection to the amendment. Number one, it was already clarified that there's folks employed there. Number two, I don't think it has to do with about the other agencies that if you were a former director or not. That's beside the point. The issue here is that we're talking about assisting the challenged folks we have out there by providing them the job coaches. That's what the issue is to continue the funding of job coaches. And that's why I would object to the May, and that we shall ensure that the folks that are challenged are getting the services they need with job coaches. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator San Augustine. Anyone else on the amendment? Speaker Talahi?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I want to note that job coaches are a federally funded program. And when they exceed the federally funded program, that's when we are trying to, accommodate them in local programs, which I have no objection to doing. But this is the problem that I'm looking at. DICID, has asked for flexibility with this funding in order that they can also train job coaches and certify them, CPR, first aid, seizure training, that they can train GovGuam employees who work with job coaches to receive disability awareness and sensitivity training, and also receive CPR, first aid, and other training that will help assist the job coaches when needed in the job place. And they've asked this in 2019 and 2020. And it's just a matter of flexibility, and it's very important, I think, this year because they have told us that they need $3.1 million to cover gaps in services for people with disabilities on Guam. And so I say with that type of a gap in service, we give them the maximum flexibility that we can. We do not tie their hands. And if you look at DICID's budget, it looks, it's a little bit deceiving. It looks like they are receiving $4 million more than they received last year. Last year, they only received $999,000. This year, they're receiving $5 million. But the reason for that, it's got nothing to do with filling gaps in services or allowing them flexibility, because what that money is going for, my understanding, is that behavioral health transferred responsibility for the respite care, personal care attendants, community rehabilitation programs carried at homes from Guam Behavioral Health now to DICID. And that's what this money, it's just kind of like a paper transfer that is really to manage those contracts that have already been contracted out by behavioral health. There's an MOA with Guam Behavioral Health for the transfer of the Catholic Social Services contracts for respite care, community rehabilitation, and these other programs. So they're not getting any increase in funding, and they have made it clear that they're in need of funding. And so all we are asking here today, if we're not going to give them more funding, is to allow them maximum flexibility. And nothing in this amendment is going to prevent them from putting it to job coaches as they have, but to also allow them to put it to whatever they feel like they need to do immediately. And to make sure that we can take care again, as with the limited resources, of as many people as we possibly can. And that's all. So I would ask my colleagues for their support on this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. All those in favor of this amendment signify by raising your hands. Motion fails. Now on the main amendment. Anyone on the main amendment? If not, Senator Shelton? Sorry, Speaker Talahi on the main amendment? Senator Shelton, you may close.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I think here in this body, we have a very unique opportunity. Our job here is to set our priorities in this budget. So like we've been doing through these amendments, to fund nurses' pay, to ensure that teachers get the pay they've been promised. We have the opportunity to here to ensure that individuals with disabilities have the support they need to continue their gainful employment with the government of Guam. I thank my colleagues for their support of this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Shelton. Any objections to the amendment? No objections, motion carries. We'll take a moment's recess. Okay, we are back from a short recess. Speaker Talai, did you have?
Yeah, I'd just like to ask OFB, what was DISIT's request this year? Was it the 1 million?
Senator, they requested both for the 1 million from the general fund and the 4 million.
And what's the 4 million for?
As you previously stated, it's actually to cover those contracts that have been transferred from behavioral health to DISIT to start, I believe, in FY2022.
Did you have a budget hearing for DISIT?
I'm going to have to go back, but I know we did meet with them in my office, but whether or not we had a budget hearing, I would have to verify that, Senator.
Right. Did they request additional funding or the need to specially allocate money for job coaches at that time.
During our meeting, Senator, they did not ask to fund the job coach program.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I don't remember a budget hearing for this either. I remember preparing with them, but that there was no hearing. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Salai. All right, we are at the end of Chapter 3. There are no more amendments in Chapter 3. We've exhausted all the amendments in Chapter 3. So unless there are any more questions for Chapter 3, we will close Chapter 3 and move now to Chapter 4. Chapter 3, there are a couple of bookmarks in Chapter 3 to Part 1 and Part 4, I believe. So aside from those bookmarks, we will close. Aside for 4 and 3, we will close those bookmarks. Aside from the bookmarks, we will close Chapter 3 and move to Chapter 4. We are now on Chapter 4, Unified Judiciary. There are no amendments that have been proffered for this chapter. Are there any questions on this chapter? Speaker Talahi, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have an amendment to this chapter, but I did want to note when I was reviewing the substitute bill that the judiciary's budget is increased by $3,221,514. That's an 11% increase in their budget compared to FY21. I'm just noting this because we are seeing other agencies like DICIT who are struggling and really have not received any increase. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Anyone else on Chapter 4, Unified Judiciary? Any questions? Again, there are no amendments that have been proffered for this chapter, but if anyone has any questions about this chapter, Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just in light of what the senator from Jonya spoke on, Steve, what was the original request from the judiciary?
I believe their initial request, Senator, to our office was around $35 million.
And there was an increase of $3 million?
There's an increase over FY21 appropriation level by $3 million, yes.
Did they say why they needed that increase from FY21?
Well, when we looked, we took their budget, including the staffing pattern and everything, and we calculated based on what their requirements would be. Just personnel alone, personnel alone jumped maybe 1.6 million. In 1 year. So what we found out, like in FY22, thus far, they've already hired 1.6 million worth of new bodies.
And then the other 1.4?
1.47 million was for contractual services, 1.14 million was for utilities, and 10,000 was for drug testing. Okay. That sums up $32.7 million.
Did they receive any additional money from the CARES Act or
that
ARP?
Yeah, that one we were trying to inquire. We never got an answer on that one, so I'm not too sure whether or not they received any money from ARP money or CARES Act.
For the CARES Act, if I may, as of April 30, 2021.
Madam Speaker, you have a point of information?
Yes, point of information. Judiciary was allocated $475,000 for COVID-related expenses, $79,000 for actions to facilitate compliance with public health measures. I think it says they went over budget by $67,100, and then a small amount, 1,800 for COVID-related economic support and other. They have said that they were promised ARP funds, but we have not seen that transfer yet.
Was there an amount that they were promised ARP funds?
I'm sorry, Senator?
The senator from Jonya said that they were promised ARP funds. Do we know the amount?
I don't have that information, Senator. And, you know, the amounts that you referenced, those were specifically for COVID-related expenses. What I was referring to and about whether or not they received any ARP money was more in line if it was to support operations.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. Anyone else? Senator Brown?
Yes, before we leave this section, I do want to ask, because of course, I mean, during these times, as we live in our artificial, economy that we're in, you mentioned this was an 11% increase to the judicial budget. How does this compare to, and I'm asking it because we're at the judicial budget, how does this compare to the legislature or the executive branch with the governor's office in terms of any increase to our budgets?
Give me a second, Senator. I'll get that number to you.
I'd appreciate it. I think it'd be good for us to know. Thank you.
Senator Brown, can I get back to you on that? It's going to take me just a little time to calculate that.
Yeah, I'd move, Mr. Chair, that we take about a 5-minute recess anyways, because the executive branch is coming up next, and we can
It'd be good to know. Yeah, it'd be good to know.
organize our amendments
All
for
right,
that.
we'll take a 5-minute
Chair?
recess.
Chair,
Senator
if I may be, and also the information, if we can get on what is it funding, this additional $3 million that's given to the judiciary, where is it going to? That's
All
all,
right.
okay?
Okay. We'll take a 5 minutes and maybe 10. So why don't we just do a 10-minute recess? The Committee of the Whole is called to order. Senator Brown, have your questions been answered from OFB?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just for the record, I would just like if Mr. Guerrero would announce his findings of those figures in terms of any increases in this budget with regards to our three respective branches of government, so that we are all aware of what they are.
So, for you to just state it.
Okay, Senator, to answer your question, I believe your question is, you wanted to know what percentage each branch in the government received in terms of appropriation over FY21 and what proposed in the bill. Well, for FY21, for the executive branch, the actual increase is zero. There's no actual increase in the executive branch in terms of percentage, simply because the amount is so minimal.
Just to clarify, is that the entire executive branch overall? The bottom line is we're not increasing any amounts for the entire executive branch? Or are we specifically talking of the governor's office? Or?
No, we're talking about total appropriation for the executive branch.
Okay.
Yes.
So even with the increases that we've added on here and amended, we are receiving absolutely no increase to the bottom line if it was appropriated in 2021?
If you're talking about total general fund, special fund appropriation to the executive branch, yes, it's zero.
Okay.
I mean, you can have an increase of $1 million here, $1 million there, $5 million here, but we're talking about $707 million. Okay, so the percentage difference for the legislature for FY21 versus FY22 is 6%, and then for the judicial branch for the same period it's 11%.
If I can ask, what were the increases for? I think we'd all be interested in knowing for the legislature. If the legislature's increased its budget from the previous fiscal year by 6%, what were those increases for?
I believe, Senator, those increases were attributed to increases in operations for each senatorial's office for about 20,000 per office, and I believe approximately 223,000 was for the reimbursement for the lump sum payouts.
So the legislature increased its budget to accommodate a $20,000 increase for each senatorial office? And then the legislature had not budgeted within its previous budget for the lump sum payments?
That's correct, Senator.
So then the legislature overexpended its budget without accommodating for lump sum payments for this, I'm assuming is the end of the last fiscal year?
I believe, Senator, last fiscal year's lump sum payments was covered by funds within the legislature, by either respective senatorial budgets and or monies they took from, I believe, central office.
So how would there be an increase if the funds were there? I mean, why would we increase it then from what was appropriated?
I believe the increases is predicated based on the anticipated lump sum to be paid out.
So the legislature increased its budget anticipating an increase in the lump sum payout, which I'm assuming when you calculate our budget for our employees, since the senators don't get lump sum payments, that would have been calculated in the budget. Shouldn't it have been calculated in the budget so it's not increasing its budget to accommodate that?
For all intended purposes, Senator, yes. I believe whatever your appropriation is for personnel services, I would think that you would take the appropriate steps to make sure that you have adequate funds to pay out a lump sum if required at the end of whatever term.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to know, because I'm not as clear with regards to the budget of the legislature. And then supposedly each senatorial's office had an increase of 20,000. Does that include us minority senators? I'm not aware. I mean, we were given a budget when we came in. So where did that come from?
You're talking about the increase of 20,000?
Yes.
That's just a number. I think, Senator, what we did is we worked into the budget, and we just did it across the board. And if it's if it's funding that maybe is not required for individual senators, I'll be more than happy to make any adjustments needed.
Yeah, I have no problem. I'm probably the least expended senator in this legislature, but I just wanted to get that information because I was not aware that increases were made to the legislative budget to accommodate increases to senatorial offices.
I believe the intent, Senator, was just to equally put it across the board and that no one senator had more than the others, and we just kind of like just did a flat increase across the board.
No problem, Mr. Guerrero. I don't expect you to justify the actions of the legislature, just provide the factual information. With regards to the judiciary, what is the increase of this additional 11% from last year's budget? Where is that money going to?
Okay, as compared to FY21 budget and what they're proposing their FY22 budget, we are allocating $30 million for 401 FTEs in the court, both field and vacant positions for FY22, 1.47 million for contractual services, 1.14 million for utilities, and the balance of $10,000 for drug testing. And I'm sure there's other programs that are being funded from this appropriation. In our communication with the Chief Justice when we had our budget meetings at my office, he was very well content with if we can provide him basically a lump sum budget to a total of around maybe $34 million. That would be a sufficient funding level to fund all the programs within the judicial branch. So what we try to do is try to get to that level and not specifically limit any one of the special miscellaneous appropriations that are reflected in the bill to any specific level, but just to give him at least the authority to move within that lump sum budget to cover all these programs. So unfortunately, I wasn't
Can we just
able.
specify, I know you mentioned 401 employees, but do we know specifically what the increase of the 11% is going to at the court?
For personnel,
Okay.
as compared to FY21? Well, just looking at what I have in front of me, which was basically information that we use using the current 21 staffing pattern and versus the 22, we actually saw an increase of 1.6 million in personal hires for FY21 and FY22. That's what they're budgeting for. And we also, and some of these positions, I've been told, they're in the 6-digit numbers for one position. So, these positions are being hired at that salary level to include maybe benefits, roughly benefits anywhere from 20% of the total salary. You can have like 4 or 5 positions that's almost close to $600,000-$700,000. So it's not, mind you, the court, their positions over there, you're talking about lawyers, you're talking about, high-paying type positions that command, I presume, six digits, looking at the current staffing pattern of similar position titles.
Yeah, I just think publicly it should be known. I appreciate, you providing the information. It's really not your position to have to justify why these increases have been added, but I think we need to be aware of it if it's at that amount. Because I just don't want to be in a position of being unaware, Mr. Chair, and then a year or two from now, we're having to come back and cut because we've authorized these increases within the respective department and agencies in our government. With that, thank you very much, Mr. Guerrero. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. There are no amendments for Chapter 4, right?
Mr. Chair.
Senator Tello, you have a...
Yeah, actually, Mr. Chair, I'd asked the question, but I'm glad Senator Brown asked how much of this increase and where did it go. My question is on the part that says 1.1 in utilities. Okay, now this is the amount that the 3 million, if you add this up, 1.3 for positions, 1.47 for contractual, and then 1.1 for utilities. Is that an increase from what they had last year? In other words, that 1.1 is an increase to their utilities. It's not part of what they currently spend for utilities, but it's an increase. Bless you.
Yes, Senator. Last year when we budgeted for judiciary, especially when it came to personnel, we hardly even budgeted any vacant positions. So if you recall, I believe the beginning of January this
I'm
year.
talking about utilities, not vacant positions.
No, but I'm leading up to how,
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
So I believe back in January this year or February, the court put out a public announcement that they were doing austere measures, the possibility of cutting back simply because the insufficient funds going forward. But, you know, I commend them. I don't know how they did it, but they stayed within that level to meet all their, I guess, fixed costs. And then how they managed to, you know, move and transfer the monies around to meet these obligations, you know, so be it. But what we're looking at the 1.4 is what they're asking for and what the increase is over last year. I believe probably they took into account the anticipated increase in GPA, which I believe also I was told that they're going to suspend it because GPA received some, you know, ARP money. But these are the things that they submitted in their budget. And I thought they were appropriate, and we went ahead and funded it at those levels.
Again, Steve, is this 1.1 additional funding for utilities? In
No,
other words,
that is the cost of utilities for the whole year.
Combined, right?
For the whole year, yes.
Oh, okay.
For the whole year.
Okay, because I was asking how much of the $3 million in additional revenue that's being appropriated to the judiciary, well, how is that $3 million being used for? And it's used for 1.3 for positions, 1.47 for contractual service, and 1.1 for utilities.
The total amount, Senator, that they anticipate to utilize for personnel for new hires is 1.6 million for FY22 alone. That's half of the 3 million.
Okay.
And
Right, so utilities.
The utilities, like I said, they budgeted a little bit more anticipation of rate increases. Whether or not those rate increases go into effect, I don't know.
Okay, let's simplify it. How much money did we appropriate for utilities for the judiciary branch in 2021?
Senator, like I said, in FY21, the only thing basically that we funded for judiciary, believe it or not, was filled position, warm bodies. We hardly didn't give them anything for operations.
So you don't have those numbers on how much we appropriated for utilities? You just gave them a lump sum and let them do what they wanted to do and pay it out?
The level that we gave them last year, Senator, was a level that we already knew and they knew that was not supposed to, but it was just only, I would say, adequate to cover warm bodies on board. We hardly did not appropriate anything for operations for the court. Okay. So now, here we are in FY22, we're trying to at least help them get out of that rut. I told the judge myself, presiding judge myself, I said, kudos to you for you kind of like just staying above the water and not, sinking based on the levels you have for FY21. But we'll see whether or not we can help you in FY22. And those are the levels we appropriated for those categories in 22. So the amounts that I mentioned earlier about the 1.6 for the hires, the 1.4 for contractual, and the 1.1 for utilities is basically comprised of the increase, the $3 million increase that we're giving them over FY21 appropriation.
Okay, so basically you're identifying it this year and saying that this is this additional revenue and it's going to these 3 different areas in the judicial branch.
We're at least advising the judicial branch that these are the areas that we are funding. But it's still up to them when we give them the lump sum, how to use these funds.
Okay, Steve, so the next question is then, based on the budget, because it wasn't in last year's budget, but based on this budget for judiciary, you don't indicate that in the budget bill. In other words, on page from the pages on judicial branch, you have family-centered drug therapy, electronic monitoring, transfers. You don't have anything under here for utilities. So I guess you are just giving them a, okay. Anyways, it's not in there, so thank you. Thank you.
Well, just for clarification, Senator, as all the departments, this department is not a line item budget. It's not meant to do that. It's given a lump sum, and it's up to the agency to decide how best to utilize these monies. Same thing with the court. There is a general fund appropriation and a safe street fund appropriation. And it's up to the court to decide how they would like to utilize these funds. There is a list on the judicial section that lists several different programs. But if you also noted, it's being allocated from the top, from the total.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Senator Tyree. My colleagues, this will close Chapter 4 under the Unified Judiciary. No further comments. Chapter 4 is now closed. It is now 11:25. We'll move now into Chapter 5, but we got 5 minutes, and there's no way we're going to be able to complete any sections on Chapter 5. Executive branch. Okay? So we will recess and come back at 12:30. My colleagues, see you at 12:30.